A musician,
a long-distance kayaker,
a businessman,
she looks after animals,
artist,
author.
We interview remarkable people.
They're talented in so many different areas.
You're listening to The Dialogue.
89.7 FM Eastside Radio.
You're listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio, and this is The Dialogue with Natasha Moy. Today we are interviewing Lyndey Milan, OAM, food luminary, author, speaker, TV personality, and I actually think, and I believe she's brought out a bakeware range. So actually we just kind of have a little bit of everything. Lyndey, welcome.
Oh, thanks very much for having me, Natasha.
Now, I wanted to have you in the studio for a long time, and I did manage to drag you in on my Food and Focus show, which I was very, very lucky about. But I feel that my interest in you as a woman is in your career. You've done an exceptional amount, and a lot for, I think, for our gender. You know, a lot for women. You've sort of stood up there and done it in a very not a particularly out there kind of way. You've just done. I am going to take you back to your childhood and ask you what it was like growing up and where the influences were that sort of brought you into this food industry and media industry. What happened back there? Or nothing at all, maybe.
Well, I am the youngest of four, and I'm told that I was adored when I was born. My recollection as I grew up was that I didn't only have mum and dad to tell me what to do, but I had a brother and two sisters to also tell me what to do. However, we were brought up in a very loving family, but very strict, as families were at that time. You know, Dad was very, very strict and was wait till your father gets home. You know,
oh, really? One of those, and you're going to get into trouble?
Oh, yeah, and then we get belted, you know, par for the course, really. However, you know, it was a happy childhood. Dad was always there, never went to the pub. And so that's my recollection, you know, family holidays. My parents were conservative and quietly religious, but very generous and very gregarious. So it was an era when if Dad had overseas business guests, they came home for dinner and Mum cooked. And we sat around the table and minded our P's and Q's, and I thought that's what everybody did. They used to have a Christmas party every year for about 70 people. Mum cooked it all. She was a good home cook. That would be a buffet. She would, before $2 shops, she would go and buy little gifts for everybody, little insignificant gifts. And Dad would write a ditty about every guest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then at about 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock or something, he'd disappear upstairs and come down in his Santa suit that he had inherited from his father, and he would recite these ditties. So I guess there was a good touch of the performer there. My grandfather had been an actor until he wasn't allowed to marry my grandmother because he was a ne'er-do-well if he was an actor. So, you know, I guess there's a bit of that performance in there. Yeah, but we were also brought up to believe in hard work, both in around the house but also at school. But we were also taught that we could do anything we wanted. It was entirely up to us and how we applied ourselves. So we all went to opportunity school, the girls. My brother didn't, but he came dux of his school in primary school. And so then when we went on to high school, the expectation for me was that I would go to university.
Talking about the ditties, I know that you like to sing.
Yes.
I believe that this is a bit of a family tradition, the singing. I believe that Blair had a great voice, but you and your daughter apparently loud and a little bit sort of, you know, harder than the rest. But does that come from you know, your childhood, the little bit of the singing at home?
Oh, absolutely. Well, my grandmother and my great aunt were both singing and piano teachers, and my mother used to play the piano. Not much when I was a kid because she was a bit busy with 4 children. Yes, it did, and I started rewriting words of songs, I think, that I can remember when I was about 16. We used to go to these church camps and we used to perform in the concert. I loved it. And yes, John and I do that. We rewrite words of songs for people's birthdays. We do one for New Year's Eve every year, and it's always themed on what's happened that year or where we've been. Yeah, it's great fun.
It is. It does sound like great fun. So childhood led into university, and what did we do at university?
Well, I would have liked to go to NIDA or art school, but that was not an option. I had to go to a proper university like Sydney University. So I did a BA Dip Ed. I majored in fine arts and history. I taught art for a year here in Australia. I got married when I was 20, which was rather ridiculous. It was all about legal sex.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, it was in
well,
those
you were raised
days.
as a Christian,
Yeah.
so you had no choice.
And it was in those days. Perfectly nice guy. Nothing wrong with him, but we were like chalk and cheese. Well, what do you think when you're 20? It's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
So, but we went overseas and I did temporary work, 3 months around Europe in a van. I loved looking at the food everywhere. Just loved it.
Really?
But I had started cooking when I was 16. My mother had bouts of not being well and having to go away for treatment on her back. And so the others were all a lot older than me. So when I was about 16, it was just Dad and me at home for a month or so. And I started cooking then, and I saved up my pocket money and I bought a book called The Margaret Fulton Cookbook.
And Margaret Fulton apparently does feature every now and again at your dinner parties
Absolutely.
at home. I mean, she is, as we say, she is a national treasure,
She is.
and has obviously influenced an enormous number of amazing food people like yourself. So, you've when did the food when did it kick in as a passion, or did it become, or was it the performance and the food that kind of got you going?
Well, I think I wasn't allowed to be a performer, so I think the food came in. But I started cooking when I was 16, and I then decided as I got a little bit older it was a great way of entertaining the boys.
Yes.
Because no other girls used to do it. Actually, I had one friend at school, and she and I used to read her mother's magazines from America up the back of the class under the desk when we should have been, studying Shakespeare or something. Yeah, so it continued to be a recreational, thing that I just really enjoyed. And getting married at 20, well, that was fabulous. I used to hold dinner parties and things like that.
So you had a stint in the UK.
3 years.
For 3 years. What did you do while you were there?
Well, I split with my first husband. That's what I did.
Okay.
And I met my second, Nigel, and I ended up as general manager of what was then the largest creative consultancy in Europe. Now, that was 45 people. When I joined, it was 30, and I'd started as the EA to the chairman and managing director. But after I met Nigel and said, look, I'm staying in the UK and not as a jumped-up secretary, they said, look, you're half running this place anyway, so if you can replace yourself, do you want to be general manager? So I did that. So
How old were you?
Oh, I don't know. 25, 20.
Oh my goodness. So already at that point you had that commanding kind of ability to drive things and that people believed in you.
I think some people might say bossy.
No, we're women. We are never bossy.
Yeah.
We are never bossy. We
No.
are just amazing.
Yes. Well, there you go. So, and I'll tell you what was interesting when I was there. It was a great place. I learnt a lot. One of the old men of the advertising business was the chairman, a guy called David Bernstein. First night of commercial television in the UK, he had a play he'd written interrupted by 2 commercials he'd written. Things like the SO sign means happy motoring. So I learnt a lot from him. But I used to get in cordon bleu cooks to do our boardroom lunches, and I'd sit there eating it and I'd think, I can do better than this. So that planted a seed at the back of my mind. So we came back to Australia as it being a better place to have children. So Nigel got a job up through an introduction I was able to make, and we moved back to Australia. And I worked in advertising here as well until it seems like I was 9 months pregnant, but I was probably only 8. And then thought I won't work again until my kids are at school, but then I was bored. By then I was extremely involved in Nigel's career. We did a lot of entertaining and a lot of socialising with that. And I started a catering business.
Just talking a little bit about Nigel's career, obviously, he did brilliantly. He was very successful in SBS and in radio, just all over the shop in terms of media, very well known. What was that partnership like? I mean, not only were you with Nigel for, that many years, but in not that long ago, because it's not that long ago, you partnered up with John, and he is also a particularly dynamic and driven man. It's very unusual to have two such powerful people in a relationship.
Well, I have to say that Nigel and I split up 28 years ago. Now, when I met him, he was not a powerful man. And I would like to think that I helped him become that, because certainly in terms of being known, his publicist said, you guys have got to go out because every time they mention you, they'll mention, the radio station. And we did that. And he's very bright, and he's not afraid to surround himself with the best people, which is really good. So that was part of it. But the entertaining and everything else we did was extraordinary. But I think for me, I didn't get any credit from him personally about the role I played, and I found that very difficult.
Okay.
Because I did not enjoy being trivialised.
So once that marriage had come to a conclusion, you had two children already, Blair and Lucy, and you were single for a long time. Was the selective singlehood, or too busy? Children? Where did you go with that?
Well, to start off with, it was definitely about wanting to protect my children.
Okay.
I think children deserve to grow up in their own home feeling safe and secure and not threatened by other people. Not that they would threaten them, but, kids are very sensitive. My kids were only 3 and 7. So largely it was because of that. Then it was the dearth of
fantastic men.
Of single.
Yes. Still happening
fabulous
today.
men, yeah. And then it was only when they sort of got to be teenagers that, I did have a relationship with someone for nearly 2 years, and then later on as well. So I think I wanted my kids to be set up and happy and self-confident and everything first. And also, I think as you go into the public eye, it's really important to keep your private life private.
Absolutely. Your relationship with John obviously is very different. I mean, I read that you met one another and in a cooking class that he didn't actually want to go to. In fact, he hated the other day. I loved what he said. He said that he doesn't live to eat, he eats to live. He couldn't really care what was on the plate, and he thinks service is far more important than anything else. Service, ambience, and then the food kind of last, which I find hysterical, given that food is such an important part of your life.
I know, it is hysterical. We've been together nearly 9 years. A friend gave him a cooking class for a birthday present, and he had no intention of going until the friend rang him and said, it's tomorrow night and I'm coming too. And so he had no choice, and he came. And it's interesting because the friend wanted to move him out of his comfort zone, which I think is terrific, because John likes to move other people out of their comfort zones, but he sees it as trivial, and which of course it isn't. And however, he said he loved my sales technique. You see, I love cooking, I love teaching, and I get so carried away and excited with the food that I'm cooking, and I'm so enthusiastic about it. And so I demonstrate for an hour, then they go in and do it practically for an hour and a half. Then they go and sit down in the dining room, and then I put up some wines. It was a Spanish class, Spanish seafood and wine. And I make sure I spend equal time at each table. And anyway, the repartee started. He was embarrassed to be there, and anyway, the repartee just started, and so the next day he rang me.
And invited you on a date.
And invited me to lunch.
To lunch.
Now, I was too busy to go for 4 weeks.
That's right, yes.
And
Nothing
I was
like
not
keeping a man
I was not playing games, but I thought lunch. It's either a lovely invitation or he's married. That's why he wants to do lunch. Oh, it's just a bit of fun. Anyway, it turned out it was a lovely invitation. And he thought lunch was much gentler, shall we say, than dinner. We did have dinner as well that day.
I imagine you've had many since then. In fact, I believe you have very big dinner parties at home and I've heard from many people who've attended your dinner parties that they're quite exceptional events. Interesting people sort of together, and, you get everyone to introduce the person on the one side of them. I think that's such a brilliant idea. I'm going to steal that for my next dinner party.
It came to me in a blinding flash. We had some people for dinner, and I thought, well, what a good idea. They've got to introduce the person, right or left, because it then makes them engage with the people on both sides. And it was brilliant. And I remember at one of these, actually, Margaret Fulton was there, and the guy next to her was so humbled that he stood up to speak about it. It was absolutely gorgeous. But it's a great way to get people to engage, and usually there'll be someone who'll play the piano and
then
we'll
you'll get
sing.
to sing.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Then you get to sing. You're listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue. I'm interviewing Lyndey Milan, OAM, who is a food luminary, author, speaker, and TV personality. We naturally have to touch on, your family and your son Blair and your daughter. Your son was just the light of your life and an amazing young man, from what I can understand, who died very suddenly from leukemia. Just such a shock, no idea that he was sick, and just this life-shattering experience for you.
Well, we knew that he was sick. He sort of had the flu that he couldn't shake. He went to a doctor. I found out later that the doctor had not given him a blood test, but had said, oh, well, you must be having panic attacks, and put him on antidepressants, which is ridiculous. This is a doctor he'd never seen before. Well, he didn't have a GP. He was never sick. This is a 29-year-old who worked out, who ate healthy food, who didn't drink from Sunday to Thursday. He may have made up for it between Thursday and Sunday, did positive affirmations every day, but I think he was feeling so bad that he lost his self-confidence. He then had his wisdom teeth out, and he was on an antibiotic, and I said to him, you've got to go back, because while you've got an infection, you cannot have them out. He went back, and the oral surgeon said, oh no, they're just so badly impacted, until you have them out, you won't be better. Blair then has massive trouble keeping the clot, keeps losing the blood clot, and the oral surgeon did not give him a blood test. He said, it's a sign you've got really good blood. So Blair was we were overseas, and Blair had emailed me and said, oh, I've turned the corner. But no, then he went to a doctor and said, I want a blood test. Blair did. And after that, he fainted on his motor scooter, of course, because he was grossly anemic. And so the next day, he then contacted me, and I Skyped with him. And the next day, I put a couple of things in place, my then PA, to go and take him to the doctor and things. But he collapsed and went to hospital at the same time that the doctor rang back with the blood test. Yeah, so acute myeloid leukemia. So he was in hospital on the Thursday. We arrived back. We were in Sicily. We arrived back on the Saturday morning, and he died in the early hours of Sunday morning.
So how, as a woman who, every single one of us as a mother, spends our life raising our children with that as our absolute idea of horror. It is what sits inside you that it is our fear. How then, when it happens, do you cope? Do you carry on? What is it that made you just get up in the morning and still want to go?
Well, I think you're in shock for a bit, because you think, how could this be true? And also, we're brought up to behave well. And they said in the hospital, so I'm there with Nigel, his wife, John and I are there. The family's there. I then allowed all of Blair's close friends in, his friends he went to uni with, and then his mates he went to school with. And I think you're in a bit of a state of shock. And we all clung together and talked about being in the bubble, because his funeral wasn't for 2 weeks after, and we'd just opened our studio. And the kids used to come in, because they'd all done theatre media at Charles Sturt, and they came in every day and worked on the tribute. And so I think, it's a bit of a weird time, but you don't have a choice. The thing with Blair is that Blair and I had no unfinished business. Yes, I would have liked him to be conscious when I got home. Yes, I would have liked to say goodbye to him. But there wasn't anything left unsaid that meant we hadn't completed things. So, and I've got a daughter. So you can't just give up.
No, absolutely.
You've got a responsibility to her. She's adorable. So she's got aunties. We're very close to Nigel's family in England, very, very close. And I was very close to my father-in-law until he died a couple of years ago. And the thing is, she offered to move home I said, Lucy, you've lost your big brother, your best friend and your mentor. Don't let it completely ruin your life. If your future, and she'd set up her own business, is in London, that's where you got to be. And I am not your responsibility. I am my responsibility and you are your responsibility.
That's an incredibly grown-up attitude for even a parent, because most parents wouldn't have that attitude. They really wouldn't. You know, I when I was reading the stories about Blair and you and what an amazing sort of mother-son relationship you had, I was extraordinarily touched. But I think a lot of parents don't actually get to have that with their child. So, you know, as you say, no unfinished business, quite an incredible relationship that was so healthy in so many ways. Now, I want to move on a little bit to your career, which has obviously been fairly phenomenal. You are currently a judge on television. You have written how many cookbooks? 9. And one of them is one like the world's best cookbook. The world.
Yeah.
You know?
Lyndey Milan's Taste of Australia, best TV chef cookbook in English in the world
world.
year. Yeah, pretty good, isn't
that's
it?
Pretty awesome.
It is, I thought it was pretty
Come on.
awesome.
You know, you've been awarded an OAM. You know, that you can't get any better than that. I mean, other than a Purple Heart, and I don't think we give those. So your career has just burgeoned. Those things don't happen on their own. You know, people don't find you. You have to be putting out a certain amount of energy. So what is it that your strategy around your career is that you keep going and growing?
I don't have a strategy, which I know is very bad, and I should never admit to that. I was brought up with a very strong work ethic, and I think that's where it came from. And also my mother always said, it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you deal with it that is important. So I had this massive work ethic. So then when I'm suddenly left with 2 children, and I think, well, I didn't want to go back to teaching. I didn't want to go back to advertising. I thought, well, I'm just going to forge ahead with food. By then my catering business was quite successed. I mean, it wasn't a full-time job, but it was quite successful.
It's hard work though, catering.
It's really hard work.
Work.
And then we'd taken in a third partner, and then we bought a cafe. Oh my God. Running a cafe and a catering business is quite extraordinary when you've got young children. And but about 1990, I'd already started on radio in about 87, possibly 88. And then around 1990, I was asked to do a little spot on TV, and I wrote. And so once we got out of our cafe in 1990, I was able to increase the media work and decrease the catering, which was great. But I think it was just that I work really hard. I don't say that near enough is good enough. I've continually educated myself in other ways. If there's been a course, if there's been something I can do, if there's something I can taste, if there's something I can think about. And that's the other reason you don't have a relationship. If you've got 2 kids and you're building a new career, you don't have any time. So I think the thing is that I do have a lot of energy, and I think I work really hard. And also, I grew up in a family where excellence was expected, more than rewarded. So I am always wanting to achieve excellence, and I have to say I do love applause.
Well, I think as anybody who loves the limelight and the spotlight, applause is actually what, you know, drives you. You do a lot of emceeing. You do a lot of, at the Royal Easter Show, you judge, and that's coming up now. So from that point of view, you know, you keep yourself out in the limelight. From a personality point of view, let's touch on your personality, because I find your personality very interesting. You have very high energy. You have a very powerful presence in a room. You hold the room. I mean, I've been going to food events for the past 8 years, and you know if you're in the room. You know, you're aware of that. So I'm kind of interested in where the confidence comes from, and if there's ever fear, is there ever insecurity?
Oh, absolutely. Most very confident people do have massive insecurity as well. But the thing is, in terms of fear, nothing worse can ever happen to me than losing my son.
No.
So what is there to be afraid of? Okay, I don't like going on fast whirly gigs. You know, I am afraid of that.
As well.
Yeah, but in terms of other things, no, I'm not. And you need that little frisson of fear or lack of self-confidence to make you step up. to be a better performer, I think.
The future. I mean, there is. You seem to just be unstoppable at the moment in terms of what you're doing, and you and your partner John are. It's okay when you've got somebody who was, one of the Macquarie Bank dudes, and sort of coming along, and he seems to just be throwing himself into your production company. You've got a commercial kitchen that you have in is it Ultimo?
No,
Artarmon.
Artarmon.
I
Yes.
always get the two confused. But, I've read a little bit that he's very passionate about what you're doing. He fully believes in you. I mean, he is your biggest fan.
Oh, he is, and he's a rock. He's been absolutely magnificent too with Blair dying. He is unshakable. He is straight as a die. He doesn't cheat, and he's rock solid. And I have to say, though, if someone crosses me, he can be quite unforgiving.
Really?
So he is, but he's the brains of the outfit. He's a businessman, and he always thinks laterally. He's got a really interesting mind, but he's also got a great sense of humour. And that's really important. I just remember early on him one morning just saying something, and I just cracked up and I thought, you know what? When the body's gone, you'll always amuse me, because he is very funny. So, but we do work really hard. He is interested in world domination.
Right.
So we sell television around the world. So we've got an office in London. We've got 5 people in London. We've got someone in Eastern Europe. We've got someone in Singapore. And then we've got an office here, of course. We're just setting up a production company in Wales because we've got the production company here. Oh, yeah. He's a very interesting man.
So just ramping up. You've brought out a cookware range, a bakeware range, because you love baking. And I think the whole idea for you is that, anything that is cooked by somebody is better than something that's bought in a store.
Correct.
So even if it's a flop,
Correct.
It's better. And what is the next big project that you've got planned?
Well, it's interesting. You see, the thing is, when you are a personality, you can largely only earn money when you, the one person, is doing something. Well, the thing with TV series and books is that they have a life beyond you. Well, there's 2 things. First of all, there's something I want to tell you, and that is Lyndey and Blair's Taste of Greece. When I went to China last year and picked up my cookbook award, I found out they have television awards. And I said, oh, look, I've got a few TV series, but, they're 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 years old. Can I enter them? They said, yeah, sure. So being a smart ass, which always brings you undone, I entered Taste of Australia because I thought, oh, that'll win for sure because the book won. But I entered Lyndey and Blair's Taste of Greece, and it's won Best Food TV from Australia. So I'm going back to China in May. I'm on the short list.
That's
So
all right.
that would be beautiful. Now, it's not as perfectly produced as perhaps, because it was our first production, later ones, but it's got a joy and a freshness, and it's got that great mother-son relationship. So that's very exciting. But I'll tell you what I've started doing now. I have started hosting cruises. So last year I did one, and we had 3 days in Rome and then 10 nights on board ship and then 4 days in Tuscany. And I'm doing another one this September, and we're going to start in Venice, and then we're going to go down the Adriatic coast as well, and then we're going to end up in Como for a few days. I love it. I had 30 Australians. They were fantastic in my particular group. Big ship though. Ship took 3,000. I loved it. It was just great because I'm a people person, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm pretty excited about that.
That sounds pretty amazing. We've come to the end of the interview. Can you believe it? We haven't even, I know, I could probably talk to you for an hour and a half and we still wouldn't even scratch the surface. I just want to say thank you so much for coming in and chatting to me, for being on the dialogue. You've been listening to Lyndey Milan, who is an OAM, food luminary, author, speaker, TV person. I don't think you can be an OAM. She has been awarded an OAM. And who is going to be just on your TVs and I think around for a very, very, very long time. So thank you so much for spending this half hour with us.
Well, thank you, Natasha, and I want to congratulate you on your extraordinary research.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.